for being willing, even if I am pulling teeth to do so. Thank you for being willing to tell your stories. Who would like to start to tell us how you grew up and what brought you to this area and what brought you to each other?
Well, I guess I'll go first because he's local and I'm not local. Well, I was
that local or loco?
both. Well, I was born in Dundalk, Maryland, which is outside of Baltimore. Probably when I was not quite 2 years old, my parents moved to Lancaster County in the city of Lancaster. I was raised there probably to the second grade. Then my parents got this bright idea to move us to a log cabin in the sticks of Western Maryland. If you don't know where Western Maryland is, if you look at the state of Maryland, it's the last county.
It's on the opposite side from the eastern part of Maryland.
Yeah, way out in the boonies. It's where we have the biggest man-made lake called Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. Up until I graduated from high school, shortly after graduating high school, I dated my high school sweetheart. Shortly after graduation, we had it fallen out. I went our separate ways. We came back together when McDonald's decided to build the first fast food joint in town, which was in 1988. I graduated in 86. They built the McDonald's in 88. Behold, this manager comes to me day of the McDonald's open up. After working there 2 days, he says, I got the perfect girl for you. I'm like, oh, really? You do? He's like, yeah, she'll be here this afternoon. She came around the corner. I won't say what I said to him because somebody's in the room that's a minor. The look on his face, he turned 3 shades red. That should tell you what I said to him. She goes back around the corner, and he says to me, you know I'm a pastor. I went, oh, no. Well, ho behold, we reconnected again, and we got married 3 years later. He married us. We had 3 wonderful children. I discovered she had married, divorced. She had 2 other children. I adopted one of her children. Then, back up a little bit, our first oldest child had medical issues. And we were traveling 2 hours back and forth for medical treatment. We got this bright idea, why are we traveling all this distance? Why don't we just move to this town, which was Morgantown, West Virginia. I moved to Morgantown, West Virginia, was able to transfer from one McDonald's to the other McDonald's. Lived there, had our set of twins there. Cooking for a while, met his neighbor guy. He said, oh my God, you're such a good cook. Why don't you go to cooking school? So he got me into cooking school. After I graduated from cooking school, I am working for the hospital where my son had all his treatment. Now here's where the K come in. Yesterday, my aunt died 20 years ago. She always told me I was very special, but never told me why I was special. This neighbor that I just told you about my cooking, he was gay. He sat me down and he said, do you know what gay is? And I'm like, no, I don't know what it is. He says, I think you're gay. What makes you think I'm gay? Do you see how you dress? You dress better than your wife does. And I see how you look at me all the time when I go in and out of the house. I said,
remember, we're keeping this G-rated.
Yes. And there was another thing that happened. We'll talk about that later. So he explained everything to me, and all the dots connected. I didn't get the chance to tell my aunt what he was telling me, what special meant. Well, I confronted my wife, all my suspicions, and he ended up having to have heart surgery, and he died. The deal was that if he survived the heart surgery, I was going to leave my wife and connected with him, but unfortunately he died in heart surgery. I thought it was a sign that I was supposed to stay married to my wife. We stayed married enough for my kids to be old enough to handle things, and then we got a divorce which did not go very well. So I ended up having custody of my children, and I had to be back to Western Maryland, where my parents helped me, and then my father passed away. After my father passed away, I said, now what do I do? So I picked up, and I moved to Lancaster, and that relationship with the gentleman did not work out. So I moved to Harrisburg, because rent was a lot cheaper here in Harrisburg than Lancaster. Behold, I went to the MCC church, which is the gay church, and went in and sat in church on Sunday, and it was the first time they were having a pride meeting, and I went to this pride meeting, and this gentleman come to the pride meeting, and
He was dressed like a leprechaun
Yes.
at the pride meeting.
because that's not a part of my life. So the next Sunday we sit down and had this little conversation, which I'll leave him tell you that part.
Oh, now?
Yeah.
We found out that we both had grandmothers who married a pair of brothers, not at the same time. My grandmother had a husband who died in a railroad accident, and she ended up marrying his brother. I don't know what happened with
Yeah,
them,
my
but his-
grandmother, first husband, fell off the back of a truck and died, and she married, and then her brother moved in to help take care of the kids. They fell in love and got married.
And why that was the basis of our relationship, I have no idea. But at the time, I thought it was some kind of a sign. I have since learned that it wasn't.
Hey, you're still here, so.
Yeah. Now you tell your story.
Oh, now? Well, I come from Lebanon. I was born and raised there. I actually was born in the Lebanon Good Samaritan Hospital, and my grandfather worked in the boiler room there, and his name was Paul. I am the only one of his multitude of grandchildren who actually got his name. He was a farmer, and farmed throughout Lebanon County, in the Jonestown area and the Cornwall area. And my mother basically grew up there. My parents, both of them. My mother was a country girl. She was a farm girl, and my father grew up in the town of Lebanon. They both had very large families. My mother had 14 children in her family. My father had 12 or 13 children in his family. So I had lots of cousins growing up. And I lived all my life until I was in my 40s in Lebanon County. And how did I get here? Well, I met a person, a woman in Lebanon County who was a singer. She had come on a tour, and she and I were married for 15 years, in spite of the fact that I knew at a very early age that I was gay. But my parents were both very, very religious. My family were mainly Seventh-day Adventists. And I think from a very early age, I realized that there was a lot of stuff about the Seventh-day Adventist Church that I really, really didn't believe in. But my parents were a little bit more liberal than some Seventh-day Adventists. We ate meat. Many Adventists are vegetarians. I had cousins who weren't allowed to do much of anything on a Saturday because that's Sabbath in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And that was not the case for my family. We liked to read and we liked to listen to music and things like that. And my parents were both avid readers. My father was a devoted scripture student. He was a World War II veteran. And so he had a huge interest in history. And when I was about 5 years old, we started traveling every summer. I had relatives in Denver, Colorado, and we'd travel for about 15 years in a row. We would travel out to the West Coast into Colorado, and we'd stay there, and we'd see all kinds of sights. And partly because of my father, I got very, very interested in history and reading, and very interested in classical music, which my father absolutely loved. And when I was in my early 20s, a woman came to our area. She was invited by a friend of mine to come and perform, and her name was Judy Cave. She was a classically trained pianist, and she'd been blind from the age of 18 months from a cancer. And I came to one of her concerts. She played the piano, and I kind of fell in love with her at that moment because she played Beethoven exquisitely, and I just was, so in love with classical music. We became friends, and about 9 years later, we got married. I had tried to come out to my parents when I was in my 20s, and they said to me, well, we don't see you as being gay. And I was in therapy with a therapist who was supposed to make me straight for 8 years. And it worked well enough that by the time my good friend Judy and I decided to get married, I thought, yeah, well, maybe I am straight. We had a very good relationship, and we were married for, as I said, 15 years. And she got cancer and died of colon cancer in 1995. And I had been her only caregiver, so her illness was very, very difficult. And when she died, the hospice which took care of her had grief workers who would phone or in person visit the people who had lost a loved one and would get into conversations with them in order to try to help them recover. And it so happened that the lady who talked to me was a lesbian. She had been married and she'd had 4 kids, and she didn't usually come out to the people she was counseling with, but she did to me, and that in many ways changed my life because she helped me recover from my wife's death, and I became a hospice volunteer for about 5 years. I went to a lot of support groups and visited with a lot of people who had lost loved ones. I was teamed up with a gentleman whose wife was very close in age to my own wife and had a very similar relationship, and I counseled with him for about a year. But I really, really enjoyed my work with hospice. My volunteer trainer was a lady named Donna, and she and the grief counselor who I'd first met, whose name was Jenny Lou, both lived here in the Harrisburg area. And they kept inviting me up to this area for various different things, and I found that Lebanon County was, to me, a little bit too conservative, a little bit too rigid for me. I had grown up there and I'd lived there into my 40s, and I just felt that it was time for a change. And I came into the idea that I really, really wanted to live in the Harrisburg area. And I also decided that I was going to come out of the closet and that I wanted to go to a church that would be open and affirming. And I looked online, and you guys weren't online then. But I found the MCC church, and Tom was attending the MCC church. I decided, I came out in May of 2012 with the help of my two friends who were grief counselors. And I decided I wanted to go to Pride, the first time I'd ever been. And the MCC church had a kind of a volunteer meeting where you could come and help make signs for Pride and some other things. And I got there on a Saturday morning, and there was this little man walking around in a leprechaun outfit. And I thought, I have no idea what gay pride has to do with leprechauns or why this little man is walking around dressed like that. And I thought, this guy's really weird. So the next day I went to church there, and he came over and sat by me, and we exchanged stories about ourselves. And as I said, we found out that we both had grandmas who had married pairs of brothers. And I swear I hadn't been drinking or anything, but I thought, well, maybe this is, I don't know, maybe this is a sign. As I said, I've since determined that it wasn't really. But I said, hey, you want to get dinner sometime? I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was looking for a friendship. But the long and the short of it is we had dinner that night. I emailed my friend Donna. Well, no, that wasn't the same night. We ate at a Mexican restaurant that night.
Oh, that's right.
And he told me all the things you shouldn't tell somebody on your first date.
And then some.
All kinds of stuff that I really didn't want to know. And I emailed my friend Donna, and I said, this guy is just so weird. He never established eye contact with me. He told me all kinds of things that I didn't want to know.
And then some.
And then, here we are. We started dating for reasons that I won't get into all of them. But we spent the first Pride Day together, and he gave away his leprechaun hat to a blind guy that he had met at Pride. And I was very touched by that because my wife had been blind, and I'll just put it this way, we started dating, and here we are.
Yeah, you got lost that night.
Yeah, I did get lost that night. We were going to have dinner together, and I ended up going to Marysville 3 times before I actually figured out where to meet with him.
Yeah, he calls me and says, hey, I'm here. I'm like,
no, he was in Harrisburg. He had moved to Harrisburg.
Yeah, I had just been in town for 3 months myself, so I was just getting new to Harrisburg. He says, I'm like, I don't even know where that's at either. I just know where Front Street Diner is. And he's like, well, how do I get there? I said, Front Street?
Well,
where's Front Street? I don't know.
We tried to meet at the Front Street Diner, and it didn't work out. Like I said, I ended up in Marysville 3 times. And
so I said, go back to the church because I know how to get there. He's like, I know how to get there too. I was like, let's go back there.
And then we ate at an awful restaurant.
Oh my God, it was so awful.
And basically that was where our relationship started.
Yeah, Bert and Ernie.
I'm glad you think that our life is comic.
It is.
Most of the time, I'm not sure it isn't tragic, but anyway, we dated for about 2 years. We went on a trip to Baltimore to the Inner Harbor, and he proposed to me. And luckily, there was an Asian man wandering by who took our photo. So I have a photo of the two of us right after he proposed to me. So, we got married in 2015 after it became legal in the state of Pennsylvania.
On
New Year's Eve.
10-ish or 15 into the new year.
Yeah, about a half an hour into midnight on New Year's Eve, 2015, we got married.
Yeah, my relatives called me and said, is there a misprint? No, it's not a misprint. It's early in the morning.
I should tell you, we got married at the
Market Square.
Presbyterian Church because they used to have a big brass band concert on New Year's Eve. And we became very good friends with the associate pastor at Market Square. And she said to us, well, there's going to be this big concert on New Year's Eve. I know you guys want to get married. You want me to perform the ceremony. So why don't we just do it on New Year's Eve? We can go out and watch the fireworks in Market Square, and then we can come back in and I can marry you.
Because it was the last year they were doing it.
Yeah. So that's what we did. And some of my family came. None of his family came.
Because they were in trouble.
But my niece and her husband will never forgive me for getting married at midnight, because on their way home to Mount Gretna, they got a flat. And they were busy fixing a flat at 3 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Day. So they've never forgiven me for that. But anyway, what else? But we've been together since then. We've been married since then. So it was 10 years
this past
on New Year's Eve. No, I don't counsel. I work for Keystone Human Services. And I've worked in the field of intellectual disabilities for almost 10 years. When I stopped volunteering for hospice, one of the reasons why I volunteered for hospice, my wife had lost a daughter at the age of 16 to cancer. And she, after losing her daughter, went to volunteer at a hospital for a children's cancer hospital. And at the time when I met her, I thought that was absolutely crazy, because her daughter's death had been very difficult for her. And I thought, you must be some kind of like glutton for punishment that you keep going into this children's cancer ward and doing all of these volunteer things. And what I found out after her death was that the best way to get over my own grief was to become a volunteer and to help other people. And I got a job working for a very small company that did job coaching and teaching life skills to people with intellectual disabilities. And I absolutely loved it. Prior to that, she was a musician and we sang together. And I was a church secretary for 10 years, and I was also a freelance illustrator. So I did a bunch of different things. But when I volunteered, when I became a person working with intellectual disabilities, that was really, really what I decided was what God really wanted me to do. And I've kind of been working at that job ever since. So I ended up working for Keystone Human Services, and what I do is I take care of a young man who has intellectual disabilities. And I've actually brought him here to the church a couple of times. Mm-hmm. But no, I did not go to college for it. I kind of went to the school of hard knocks for it. She would get mad at you for that question, because she was very, very independent. She was born with a cancer called retinoblastoma, which grows in utero inside the retina. And when she was born, which was in 1946, I believe, they weren't sure how to treat her. She had to have both of her eyes removed. And she was sent home with her parents at the age of 18 months. And they said to her, well, we don't know if we got all the cancer. So you will have whatever time left you have with her. She ended up living till she was about 62. Outlived both of her parents. What she did not know was that retinoblastoma can be passed on to children. So she had a daughter, and the daughter ended up with the illness too. But she was very, very proficient at taking care of herself. She could read both Braille, and she could read Braille music. As I said, she was a concert pianist. She performed with the Hershey Symphony. She was a really, really remarkable woman, and she taught me an awful lot. Living with her for 14 years was better than any college education I could have gotten. But she was a very good parent, but lost her daughter when her daughter was 16 years old to the same cancer, basically. So does that answer that question? Okay.
What brought you here so that your story comes from our
Oh,
Well, one thing with me, I was raised in the Assembly of God Church, and I was raised in the old Assembly of God Church. And back then, which is different now, the church is totally different where my mom and dad went. You had to be a certain age to do certain stuff. Not a part of my story that I put in there. When I was 14 years old, I was in a bad accident and almost died. But at a certain age, like each grade level we went through, like Sunday school classes were broken up by age group. Okay, same way with doing things in the church. I wasn't able to be, first you're dedicated as a baby, then you can't be baptized until you're 14, or when was Jesus preached in the temple? 7?
12.
12. We weren't allowed to be baptized until we were 12. I wasn't allowed to do communion until I was 18. I wasn't allowed to be on the board or anything until I was 21. So communion came very, very, very important to me. I couldn't wait to do communion for the first time. Even though I started working when I was 14 years old, working in restaurants because my mother was a cook, I started doing dishes. I started tithing when I was 14, but I was not allowed to do communion even though I was tithing. I even go to the pastor and say, why can't I do that? He said, that's our bylaws. So communion became very important to me. So when we went through COVID and we left the Presbyterian church because Kelly left, I said to Paul, I said, I've got to do communion. I've got to do communion. So in October is World Communion Day. So it was coming up, and I just like, I've got to go back to church. But I'd seen on your website, so I started doing research for open confirming churches. So I seen on the website that you guys were doing this thing with something with the water. What do you call it?
In gathering of waters, I think.
Gathering of water. Like, what is that about? So he had to work that Sunday. He's like, well, just take me to work, drop me off, keep the car. So I came, and Miss Thelma, bless her little heart, welcomes me with his, oh, welcome to our church. So I sit in the back pew, and I'm like, so we go through the service and see how you do the water. And I left, and I go home. I said, this is a nice church. I got this nice little lady. Will welcome you. She double checks on you. Even before you leave, she makes sure.
So it's all your fault.
Yeah.
It's all Thelma's fault.
I mean, we can blame Thelma for a lot of people here.
But yeah, then we came back. Did you come back the second Sunday for Communion Sunday?
No, it was a while.
Yeah, it took him a while because he had to work his schedule out. But basically, it's because of the sign outside. And
Well, my background in church, I was it's Sabbath school in the Adventist church. I was a Sabbath school teacher from about the age of 16. I taught all of the kids' grades, primary. The only thing I didn't teach was cradle roll, but I taught youth. And when I was in my 20s, I started teaching an adult class. My father was a Sunday school teacher, basically. And I was what was called a junior deacon. Yeah. So I was allowed to hand out communion from a very, very early age. So I was kind of like this little holy child, everybody. So I had a very, very strong background in Scripture. And we went together to the Presbyterian church, and our friend who had married us, he's talking about Kelly, left that church, and we found out that they were a bit less friendly to LGBT people than they said they were. And it was during the middle of COVID, and I was kind of like, okay, I'm kind of done with this church thing for a while. You know, I was working at a job where I worked a lot of Sundays, and I did know that there was this one church in Hummelstown that had this rainbow sign out front. So again, it's Thelma and Bill's fault. But I knew that they had this sign out, and when I said to him, he came to visit here for World Communion Sunday, and I said to him, "Oh, which church was it you went to? Was it the one with the rainbow sign?" He said, "I don't know which one it was. I just went there because of communion." And it happened to be the church with the rainbow sign. So I kind of was dragged kicking and screaming here because I really was kind of like churched out. And then there was COVID, and what we did do as far as church related was online, and I got used to sleeping in on Sundays. And you know, I say it's kind of like there's a scene in Godfather 3 where, you know, Al Pacino says, "I keep trying to get out and they keep dragging me back in." And so he dragged me back in. And that's how we both ended up here, attending this church. And we thought, this is a pretty friendly place, and we like Pastor Beth. And that's why we're here. Metropolitan Community Church. It's a church that was started back in the 1960s by a pastor who realized that he was gay and thought that there was a ministry that was not being met, and he started worship services in churches out on the West Coast and other places, which became very heavily persecuted in the 1960s. In fact, I think most of the early church buildings where they met were burned down. There was a church in New Orleans where the church was set fire to during a worship service, and a large number of the men and women who were attending that service died. So it was a church that had a very painful background. When I decided to go there, I was just looking for a church that was open and affirming. And I looked online, and like I said, you all weren't on that list at the time.
We weren't up yet.
So I wanted to go to the MCC because it was a church that was created by LGBT people for LGBT people. And I attended there really only long enough to meet him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you guys switched to Market Presbyterian.
Yeah, then we had a lot of LGBT friends at Market Square Presbyterian, and yeah, so we ended up there for a while. And I don't want you to get the idea we're church hopping necessarily, because we really weren't. We were just looking for a place where people would be friendly and where we could feel at home. And you know, one of the drawbacks for me of Market Square was that it's a big church.
Oh yeah.
And I was raised in a tiny little church where there were two families that made up the church. One was the Yeagley family, and one was the Whitman family. And my mother was a Yeagley, and my father was a Whitman, and then they married each other. So I was related to everyone in that church. And it was a very small church. So I grew up in a very small church. So coming here to HUCC feels very like home. Plus, as a former freelance artist, I have to say, you guys have one of the most beautiful sanctuaries I have ever been in, and the glass, the stained glass is just incomparable. So, you know, even Market Square, which is, they brag a lot about their history, doesn't have windows like you guys have. They're just the most gorgeous windows I've seen. Yeah.
Back in 1908.
I can only imagine what they would cost now. So
A lot more than 1700.
yeah.
As I recall, Tom's first day was somebody else's first day, and did that influence you at all
They just happened to
It just
both sit in the
happened.
same section.
Yeah. Well, actually, he was on one
Yes.
side, I was on the other side. Then Country decided to get up and
We now informally call that part of the church Castro Street because that is the area in San Francisco where all the gay people live. So, yeah. We haven't set up a sign and we're not going to. But it just so happens that the only gay man who doesn't sit in that section is Jim. Okay. But much to our surprise, the new two guys who have come in and they sit in Castro Street too. So
Yeah.
I don't know what that's
Mike
about.
and Bill.
Yeah.
Blue garbage cans? Oh. Well,
Whoever it is just has to be able to take the garbage cans in and out.
thank you, I think. We have our own blue garbage can where we live.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the first place,
And our dog
and our dog, yeah.
and our son. One kid that still lives with us.
What are you guys excited about that's happening here, or something that? What does the future look like for you here?
Well, we attended the winter conference of ONA
Yes.
last weekend,
Yes.
and they had some very, very exciting things to say. And we are very, very excited about that. As far as the UCC in general, I have known people in the UCC church for many, many years. The pastor who married my wife and I was a UCC pastor. Very nice man. I like the fact that UCC has an open and affirming attitude and that this is an open and affirming church. As far as, so I'm very excited about that. We don't seem to be able to attend a church without getting very, very, very involved. So I have no idea what we'll be doing next. That's both exciting and frightening sometimes because I never know what he's going to volunteer me for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just never know what he's going to volunteer me for. So I don't know what we're going to be doing next, you know.
But you're so willing to say yes. The problem is, if you say yes, we'll always take it.
Well, and also it's very refreshing to come to a pastor and say, you know, this is what we'd like to do a tea. And have the pastor say, sure, that's a good idea. And then after you do the tea, you say to yourself, why on earth was I so stupid to suggest this? So, like I said, I never know what we're either going to volunteer ourselves for or what we're going to be asked to do. So that's kind of exciting.
It's potentially nerve-wracking too.
Yeah, a little bit. That was pretty much in the past, but I have not been able to do a lot of artwork before I came to this church and the Faith and Fellowship. Is that the wrong name for it?
Intergenerational.
Intergenerational Faith and Fellowship Formation, etc.
The before church session.
Yeah, the nice thing about attending this church is, you know, I really enjoy doing the art projects that we do. It makes me reconnect with the artistic side of myself because I have not been able to do that. I haven't been a freelance illustrator for many, many years. So as far as selling it is concerned, I actually have had I've had a gallery exhibit at the LGBT Center in Harrisburg. Market Square started something called Arts on the Square, where they had artists from their congregation and from the area who would exhibit art, which would be a great thing to do here, actually. And so I exhibited some stuff and sold some stuff through them. But I really don't necessarily consider myself that much of an artist anymore. I have a lot of other things to do with my time. So.
Good.
No, not really. Although I have doodled people.
They don't know they're being
during the last church meeting downstairs last month. I was doodling some folks, but I won't tell you who.
Yeah, we got food and art. It's a perfect power couple.
If we ever lose if I ever lose my job, maybe we'll go to that as kind of a
backup plan.
Backup plan. I don't know, but
You found your no. It was almost a no.
that was
It was like halfway to a no.
that was a nice no, I guess. I don't know. No, but I appreciate the interest, but I haven't really been an artist in a long time. It's hard to find the time to do that. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, for sure.
One thing I would say, a lot of reason why I got into my baking was a lot to do with my grandmother and my mother. Especially my grandmother. Back to when I was telling you when I got hurt when I was 14, I was laid up for almost a year and a half. And then after that, it was rehab. My grandmother was there through the whole thing. And a lot was I would spend time with her because my mother had to go to work, I guess, to pay my medical expenses. So I spent a lot of time with my grandmother learning to can, to bake, to cook. And I think then when I did finally got into the summers between school, I'll be out in the summer, I didn't have much to do. So I went to work with my mother in the restaurant industry. So then when I graduated from high school, I worked for Arby's, McDonald's, and all them places. And like I said, when I got into West Virginia and met the gentleman I was telling you about, is I would cook, because my wife wasn't a cook. I had her make me chili one time, and I come home to beans and hamburger. No, honey, I'm taking over the cooking. And I cooked a lot, and I met him, and like I said, he was the one that encouraged me. You need to go to cooking school, And when I was in cooking school, one of the first things they did the first day I was in there was they don't tell you this till you get to the first day. They hand you a recipe, you go into the kitchen and you cook, and then the professor comes in and he tastes your food. He was watching me while I was cooking. He comes up behind me and he says, "Why are you even here for?" I'm not going to have much to teach you for it, because he watched my knife skills and all that. And then at the end of the class, he takes us all back and he sits down with me. He says, "Who taught you how to cook?" I said, "My grandmother." He's like, "I can tell by how you cracked your eggs." I went, "How I cracked my egg?" He said, "Because you do it with one hand. You don't do it with two hands." I was sharing this with Bobby not too long ago. And she's like, "What?" So Bobby took a cooking class not too long ago. And she says, I was about ready to walk up to that lady and said, "You're doing it wrong," because she was cracking it with two hands. That's just how my grandmother did it. I used to be able to cut two eggs with one hand.
Wow.
Yeah. I have to get back into that. But yeah, I I didn't graduate at the top of the class, but I did graduate near the bottom of the class because I just could not do breakfast. Breakfast was my downfall in cooking school. I could cook all the other stuff. What was my first job in the hospital? Cooking breakfast. So I overcome it. But yeah, that's the story. Now, somebody may not know, I do not work. I haven't worked since 2009 because I got a bacterial infection that travels through my body, damaged my heart and my brain. This last episode I had at the hospital, which we thought was my heart, ended up being a pulled muscle. But while I was in there, they went ahead and did some of my heart tests. There's a number that they watch with my heart, and that number has not changed, which is a good thing. What happens if that number drops is what we have to worry about, because if that number drops, then I have to get a valve heart replacement. They have to replace the valve of my heart. But it has not changed for 5 years, so we're not worrying about it. So it changes.
In the meantime, you keep yourself and your husband busy.
So what
With
we
all of
have
the
done, Mr. Kinser had to come to Jesus moment with Bobby and this man over here. So I watched my diet. I have lost 3 pounds since, when did we have that come to Jesus moment? A month ago?
Something a little bit more than that, I think.
So
Good for
maybe a
you.
month and a half. So I lost 3 pounds. So we don't eat potato chips anymore. We replaced it with popcorn.
I still eat potato chips.
He still eats the potato chips. I have yogurt and cheese and crackers for breakfast. And lunch, I do salads and tuna. So we'll see what happens.
That's awesome. Good for you.
Any more questions for the Pinocchio Gallery?
Did you have one, Tyler?
Yeah, do you have one?
Oh, you just look
No.
like you're raising your hand.
You ready to go home take a nap? Yes,
Do
country.
you have a question? Oh. Well, then
Well-
let's call us to a close.
I'm glad we put you all to sleep.
So who do we blame for the church people staying? Thelma and Bill.
There's a fair amount. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you all for staying.